Hey, video creators. No matter which video you're creating, Envato Elements has everything you need.
Hey guys. Guys, welcome back to Flatpak Effects, and in today's tutorial we're going to be making this. So stick around, you're watching Flatpak Effects. Alright, so let's get started. So in today's tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to make this iPhone text message effect. Before we get started, you're going to need to download a file off my Google Drive. Now I've put the link in the description below, and all you need to do is just download that text bubble image and then we can get started. Alright, so once you've downloaded that, you can right click, import file, and just navigate to wherever you saved it and then just hit open. Next you're going to want to right click, new composition. I'm going to call this one text message, set this one to be 1080-25, and set the duration to be about 10 seconds, and then hit OK. Alright, next we're going to grab our text bubble layer and just drag it straight into that composition. Now you'll see by the image I've already laid out the text bubbles of where they roughly need to be. So next we're going to come down to the layer, and I'm going to navigate down to the opacity, and I'm just going to drop layer to drag it straight into that composition. All right, next, and so this one, or file, and just navigate to wherever you saved it, and then just hit open. Next, you're going to want to right-click, new composition, and we're going to call this one text message, set this one to be 1080-25, and set the duration to be about 10 seconds. And then hit OK. All right, next we're going to grab our text bubble layer and just drag it straight into that composition. Now you'll see by the image I've already laid out the text bubbles of where they roughly need to be. So next we're going to come down to the layer and I'm going to navigate down to the opacity and I'm just going to drop this down to 85. Now that'll come into effect later when you drop this layer over your footage. It'll make the bubbles slightly transparent just to help sell the effect. Alright, so next we need to separate the bubbles that we actually want to use. So for my first layer, I'm going to take this top bubble. So I'm going to hit G on the keyboard or switch to my pen tool and I'm just going to roughly mask out this top bubble. Next we're going to want to actually animate that bubble. So we want it to actually pop in like we've seen in the example. So the way we do this is firstly we need to move the anchor point. So I'm going to hit Y on the keyboard and I'm going to drag this anchor point so it lines up roughly in the corner of the text bubble. Then I'm going to go down to my transform menu and I'm in the example animate and I'm just going to roughly mask out. So it'll come into effect later. We're going to drop this down to 85. Now that'll come into effect later when you drop this layer over your footage. It'll make the bubbles slightly transparent just to help sell the effect. Alright, so next we need to separate the bubbles that we actually want to use. So for my first layer, I'm going to take this top bubble. So I'm going to hit G on the keyboard or switch to my pen tool and I'm just going to roughly mask out this top bubble. Next we're going to want to actually animate that bubble. So we want it to actually pop in like we've seen in the example. So the way we do this is firstly we need to move the anchor point. So I'm going to hit Y on the keyboard and I'm going to drag this anchor point so it lines up roughly in the corner of the text bubble. Then I'm going to go down to my transform menu and I'm going to create a keyframe for the scale. I'm going to move along slightly and I'm going to create another keyframe. I'm going to go along slightly again, create another one, and a little bit further on I'm going to create another one there as well. Now I'm just going to come back to this middle one here and I'm going to scale this up to about 105. And I'm going to come back to my first keyframe and I'm going to make this 0. Next I'm going to right click on this middle one here. I'm going to go down to keyframe assist and I'm going to create an easy ease. That's just going to help soften that out. Now if I just play through that, you can see we've already got the basic animation of the text bubble. So that looks pretty good. It's got that little bounce on the end. Alright, so I'm happy with with that. Next, I'm going to right click and I'm going to create new text, and I'm going to type out j.peterson//3:05 p.m. Now this is what's going to appear above each of the text bubbles. So this you can change to whatever initial and surname you want. And the time, again, you can change this to whatever you want as well. Now, once you've actually typed that out, you're going to want to come over to your character menu. If your character menu is not there, go up to Window and then down to Character. And you're going to want to make this Helvetica New. And you're going to want to make this thin. And I'm just going to scale this down. And I'm just going to position this just above the text bubble, slightly justified in from the right. Next, I'm going to right click New Text, and this is going to be your actual text message. So I've just written, hey, finished early, let's meet up. And for the text message, I'm going to make this light. So it makes it slightly bolder than the thin. And I'm just going to position this in the speech bubble. I'm also just going to scale this up slightly just to fill. And I'm just going to reposition this here. Next, with my text layer selected, I'm going to come up to Effects and Presets. And I'm simply just going to write type. And this is what we want here under Animate In. We want this typewriter. And I'm just going to drag this on. Now, if we select that layer and hit U on the keyboard, you can see it's created these two keyframes. So that's when the animation starts and when the animation ends. I'm just going to drag this endpoint in just to speed it up. And you can see that's how fast you want it to be. So if you want it slower, if you want it faster, just drag it closer or further away. Next, we're just going to time that text as it comes in. So as the speech bubble comes up, we're then just going to drag this start point just in. So you can see we've got it sort of timed right as it pops up. And we're also going to grab our top layer and we're going to create a fade in for that one. So I'm just going to use my drop down to go to transform, create a keyframe for my opacity. Go along on the timeline, and I'm simply just going to drag those ones underneath and just move them slightly along on the timeline. So this is what we should end up with now. So that's pretty much it. That's the basic effect. So to do the other ones, all you need to do is basically just duplicate what you've got. So I'm going to take all of these layers, I'm going to come up to edit and then down to duplicate. And I'm simply just going to drag those ones underneath and just move them slightly along on the timeline. Now obviously the speech bubble's the wrong way. So what we're actually going to do is select that bubble layer, go down to masks, and we're just going to delete the mask. Now all I need to do is just go to my pen tool or G on further away. Next we're just going to come point. Play through. You're going to want to just now all I need to do is just go to my pen tool or G on the keyboard. And all I need to do is what we're actually going to do is select that bubble layer, go down to masks, and we're just going to delete the mask. Now all I need to do is just go to my pen tool or G on the keyboard. And all I need to do is just simply draw a mask around that bubble as well. Next, we need to move was just simply draw a mask to my pen tool or G. Now all I need to do is delete the mask. Now all I need to do is just go to my pen tool or G on the keyboard, and all I need to do is just simply draw a mask around that bubble as well. Next, we need to move the anchor point for that layer. So with my layer selected, I'm going to hit Y on the keyboard, and we're going to drag that anchor point down to this corner now. So that's going to animate in from that side now. And the last Last thing is animate in from down to this corner now. So that's going to animate in from that side now. And the last thing is just to grab those two text layers and just move them down and reposition them. So I'm just going to change this text. So now that one should animate in. as well. So again, here you can change the actual surname because obviously it's someone else responding. And that's pretty much it. You can pretty much just repeat this process until you've typed out your whole conversation. Now, a few things to know is I've given you a few different sizes of text bubbles here, but you can actually take these and resize them to what you need. I can actually rescale this to make it bigger or smaller. The other thing you can do is you can come up to Effect, you can go down to Generate, and you can come down to Fill, and you can make this whatever color you want. So on the iPhone, they have a green version as well, so you can make this green. It's that easy. So you can easily change the colors of these and do whatever you want. Now, once you've actually finished your comp like this, and you've got your text message laid out, the last step is all you need to do is create a new composition, drag your footage in, position that how you want. And here I've just added a lens flare for effect. And then all you need to do is just drag your text message layer over the top. Now, one last thing I've also done is I've actually done a motion track so that it sticks inside the frame. So you can see it's actually stuck to the pole as the camera actually moves up and down. Now this just adds a little bit of realism, and the way I've done this is quite simply just done a motion track of that pole, and then I've just parented this layer to that pole. Otherwise you can just overlay it over the top, it's up to you. So there you go guys, there's a really easy way to make this text message effect. Take care, thanks for watching guys, and remember, Flatpak Effects is the flat pack anyone can build. Guys, welcome back to Flatback Effects. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you a super simple way to fix some of the most common green screen issues inside of After Effects. So stick around, you're watching Flatback Effects. So this is the second part of my green screen series. In part 1, I showed you how to identify the problem at the point of filming to help avoid the issue. And in this part, I'll show you a super... So this is the second part of my green screen series. In part 1, I showed you how to identify the problem at the point of filming to help avoid the issue. And in this part, I'll show you a super easy approach to fixing these green screen issues inside of After Effects. In this video, I'm going to show you a really easy 5-step process to deal with 90% of the green screen issues inside of After Effects. Now, there are many different techniques for pulling a good key, and many can turn quickly into you losing your mind. The best ones are the ones that are simple. Complicated, put simply, does not work. The approach I like to use is called the 5 stages of not losing your shit. Now, I've used a lot of color keys over various programs, and in my opinion, the best is Red Giant's Primac Kia. But with a price tag of $500, most casual home users are not going to buy it. So as an alternative, I'm going to use After Effects' built-in program Keylight, which if used correctly can achieve the same results. Now, if you're going to do a lot of keying, I recommend buying Primac, as it's just a lot simpler and yields great results. I'm going to use most casual home users are not going to buy it. So as an alternative, I'm going to use After Effects' built-in program Keylight, which if used correctly can achieve the same results. Now, if you're going to do a lot of keying, I recommend buying Primac, as it's just a lot simpler and yields great results in much less time. Alright, so with that, let's get started. Now, I've just got a simple green screen shot here that I'm going to use for this example. So I've created a new composition and I've dragged my footage in. Next, I'm going to add Keylight, and I'm going to come over to the color picker and I'm going to select the brightest point. Now, most people will tell you to select the midpoint. The reason I suggest the brightest point is because it will preserve the most information in the shadows for us to work with. Now, the shadows are generally the hardest points to deal with, so I find it better to select the highlights to preserve as much information in those shadows as possible. Now in step 2, we need to adjust the gain until it starts to affect your subject. So basically I come over to where it says screen gain, and I need to drag this up until it starts to affect the actual subject, which is the thing we want to preserve. So you can see I've dragged this up too high already, so I'm just going to back this off. And it looks about right there. So this is where I like to adjust the screen balance. If you have a lot of spill, this is where we'll try and compensate for some of that difference. So all I need to do is adjust this to remove the green tinge, but I don't want to make my image too red. Now that's starting to look pretty good there. Now you're probably thinking this actually looks really great, but in the next step, you'll see that looks can be very deceiving. Now to see finer detail, we turn our view to screen matte. This is basically showing you the black, which is transparent or see-through, and white, which is opaque or solid. In this view, we can see straight away that there are a few areas that are not quite right. We basically want the green screen to be solid black and your subject to be solid white. If we come down to the screen matte and drag the white level down, we can add more to our subject. At the same time we are doing this, we can also bring our black level up to compensate. Now once you think you've got it pretty close, I can then switch my view back to final results and then just make adjustments from here. So in this particular case, this is giving me a hard edge that I kind of want to make a little bit softer, and that looks about right there. Now it's only a matter of just repeating the process. Basically, there are Many additional things you can do, but it's all about doing a balancing act between those simple steps. Now that is pretty much 90% of green screen. Most of the issues you're going to have you can fix with those simple steps. So let's have a look at a few other examples and we can see how we can go about fixing them. Alright, so here's a little bit of a harder one. On the surface it looks quite simple, but we've got some glasses here and they've got a little bit of reflection. So I'm going to start the process again by coming up to keying and adding my key light. I'm going to select my brightest point again. That actually looks pretty good there. I'm just going to drag my balance over. That looks pretty good. Now what I've got here is I like to create a solid background and I make this red, and this just helps point out any differences. So here we can already see that in this area here we've got a lot of spill. So if I actually go back to the original, you can see this, you can see how green it is. So this is a very common problem you'll find when working with green screen. Basically what we need to do is we need to try and use our matte to get more information back into this. So I'm going to go down to my screen matte and I'm going to start to bring these down. It's all about a balancing act of just fine tuning this. And I'm going to go back to my final results just to have a look. Now it's starting to look better already, but the more I bring these down, you can see we've pretty much lost all that spill. Now if there's a little bit of spill left there, you can actually just use this just to color correct it. And that actually looks really good. So let's go on to another example. So here we've got this lady who actually has a little bit of spill on the side here. She's wearing a white top, which is generally a very hard thing to pull a key on. So what we're going to do is we're going to add our key light again. This time I'm going to select the highlight to start. And then I'm just going to adjust this. So I'm going to back this off slightly, losing a little bit of information in here. This is the problem you'll run into with white. So I'm just going to then switch to my screen matte. So you can see we've got quite a bit of noise up here and we've got quite a bad key there. So we're just going to add a little bit more information back in there and then take the rest of that out in the black. Now that starts to look pretty good there. We're going to go back to our final results. And there you go. So that already starts to look much better than what we had. Now you can actually fine tune this further. One thing you can do is you can come up to the screen shrink and you can actually just drag this up and down. You can also mess around with this screen softness, and that's just going to soften some of these edges. So it'll just go from a harder edge to a slightly softer edge. Now, as we know, the green screen doesn't have to fill the whole screen. We only need to fill our subject. Now, when you get a shot like this, before you apply the green screen, what we're actually going to do is we're just going to draw a really quick mask so that it covers just the screen. Then we're going to apply our key light. And I'm simply just going to select a highlight. Next, I'm going to drag my gain up. And that actually looks really good there, but we'll just double check through the screen matte. You can see we've got quite a bit of detail missing there. So I'm just going to bring this white down again. I'm going to bring this up just to make sure we've got all of that information. Go back to my final results, and there you go. Now here we've got another common problem where we've got a darker spot and then we've got highlights. We've also got a few lights in the shot here. So we're going to start again by adding our key light. This time I'm going to select the highlight, and now I'm just going to adjust my screen gain. Then I'm going to switch to my screen matte. Going to add a little bit of white back in there. Darken this black down. And that's how easy it is. Now, like I said, you can mess around with a few of those settings there, but that's the basic idea. Now in this one, we could easily draw a mask around these two just to get rid of these lights. But if we played through the clip, we'd actually see that this actor's head actually passes in front of these lights. So the only way we can actually get around this is you have to do what we call a rotoscope. So you'd actually have to go frame by frame and cut, we call a rotoscope. So you'd actually have to go frame by frame and cut around the actor's head to essentially cut him out of the scene. Now, rotoscoping I'm not going to cover in this tutorial, but I will be covering that in a later tutorial. Now, just to finish, we've got quite a tricky one here, which is preserving shadows. So this is another big issue you'll run into when pulling a green screen. So we approach it in the same way. We come up to our effect and we create our key light. I'm also just going to take this opportunity to draw a quick mask around my scene. And then I'm just going to select a highlight part of the screen, try and preserve as much of that information as possible. I'm just going to bring this up slightly. Next, I'm just going to switch to my screen mat. Now, in this particular case, we're trying to preserve the actual shadow information. So as you can see, when we've come back, we've actually lost this top part of the shadow. Now, a very simple way to deal with this is you could actually just rotoscope the shadow and then pull a key separate. So you'd end up with 2 layers. But if we want to try and do it in one, we basically then need to restart the process. So in our final results view, we'd then go back to our screen gain and we'd start to drag this back the other way to add more information in. As we're doing this, we're going to go back down to the clip the blacks and we're just going to bring this back up as well. So here I've just prepared this one earlier just to show you. I've also added a little bit of screen blur, which will just help soften out this shadow here. And I'm going to turn on the background just to see how it's actually looking. Now, if I actually play through this, if you watch the shadow, you'll see that it's actually darting around a lot. So this is where you can make a common mistake, where you think that this is because you've actually taken that information out of the shadow, when in fact it was actually in the original footage. So this is actually a really good example to go back and actually look at the detail prior. And if I actually look closely at the shadow, I can see there's actually a bit of noise in that. So the reality is, this is a good example where you know you're never going to get a perfect key. So in this case, I would probably go with the rotoscope option of actually rotoscoping that shadow separately to try and preserve as much information. So that's part 2 of fixing the most common issues with green screen, and hopefully you've learned something. So this 5-step process is a really simple way to be able to deal with 90% of the issues that you'll have with green screens. Now that other 10% is where you'll spend 80% of your time trying to finesse each of the details to get the best possible key. But from a basic keying point of view, and most of the stuff that I see and deal with, this will work absolutely fine. Like I said before, the more you learn how to fix the issue, the more you'll be able to identify the issue. Now, if you've got some green screen footage you're having some trouble with, feel free to put your question in the comment section below, or you can email me directly at flatpackeffects@gmail.com. Now remember to enter your comments in my prize draw for your chance to win a free gift card. Details are in the description below. Thanks for watching, and remember, Flatpack Effects is the flat pack anyone can build.
Hey video creators, with Envato Elements you can create better videos. How? With unlimited downloads of millions of creative assets, all with commercial licenses for one low cost.
Hey guys, it's Flatpack Effects here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make this parallax effect. So stick around, you're watching Flatpack Effects. Welcome back to another tutorial, guys. And in this tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at how to finish our parallax effect. So this is actually part 2 of a 2-part tutorial. So in the first part, we looked at actually creating the landscape inside of Photoshop. And in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to put it all together to create this parallax effect. Now, for those of you that haven't done the first part, that's okay, because I've put download links in the description below, and you can get all the files that you'll need to create this effect. Now, this parallax effect is actually a really common effect, primarily used in 2D and arcade style video games. But with a little bit of forward thinking, you can actually take this concept to the next level. Now, in my latest show reel, I actually used this same technique for my character to be able to walk through the scene. I'm just going to show you the basic building blocks you need to create this, and I'm really hoping you'll take and develop this effect yourself. Alright, so let's get started. So for those of you that have done the first part, and you've created your landscape, the first thing we want to do is actually go back to Photoshop, and we just really want to quickly export our layers that we've created. So the way we do this is, if you remember, we created folders. So if you turn off all of your layers except our sky layer, you then come up to File and you go to Export. And what you need to do is you need to export it as a PNG. Now, a PNG file will actually save that luma, or the alpha values, so it allows the parts that we can't see to essentially be see-through. So you export each layer, so you'd export one for your sky. We then turn that off, and then we turn on our next layer, which would be our background, and we export that as a PNG. So you follow this same technique for each of your layers. So once you've done that, you can import those into your After Effects project. All right, so the first thing we want to do is we're going to create a new composition. So I'm going to call this one Forest, and I'm going to set this one to be 1080-25, 1920 by 1080. And just make sure the duration's set to 10 seconds, and then hit Hit OK. Next, all I need to do is just simply drag all my layers into my composition. OK by 1080. And just make sure the duration's set to 10 seconds and then hit OK. Next, all I need to do is just simply drag all my layers into my composition. Next, I just need to order my layers. So I'm going to keep the sky composition on the bottom. I'm then going to drag my background layer, which is next, and then make sure my midground and then my foreground is on top. Now at the moment it's just a still image. So what we actually want to do is extend our landscape. So we do this by selecting all our, and then my foreground. Is on top. Now at the moment it's just a still image. So what we actually want to do is extend our landscape. So we do this by selecting all our layers. We're going to make them 3D. I'm going to turn off all my layers except my sky. Then all I need to do with my sky layer selected, come up to edit and then down to duplicate. Alright, so next I'm going to right click and create my camera. Now you can name this whatever you want. And I'm going to set the preset to be 28mm. And then just leave the rest and hit OK. Now, next we need to actually move the camera. So I come up to my camera tool. And we've actually got a few options here. Now you can click on those, otherwise you can hit C on the keyboard and that'll cycle through your different cameras. camera tools. So the tool we actually want to use is this one with all the arrows pointing. And I'm simply going to click and hold Shift at the same time. And I'm going to move this off to the side so that we get about half of our screen there. Then with my top sky layer, the one that we duplicated, I'm simply just going to drag this over until it lines up with the edge here. Next, I'm going to turn on my background layer, and I'm also going to duplicate this layer. So I'm going to come up to Edit and down to Duplicate. And this time I'm going to select that layer and drag it over. Okay, so here's our first problem. So the two layers don't actually match up. Now a simple fix for this is just to come up to Layer, down to Transform, and then just hit this, flip horizontally. So that's going to make it line up exactly, flip, come up, and this layer, until it lines up with the edge. Here. Next, I'm going to turn on the edge. Then with so that we get about half of our screen there. Then with my top sky layer, the one that we duplicated, I'm simply just going to drag this over until it lines up with the edge here. Next, I'm going to turn on my background layer, and I'm also going to duplicate this layer. So I'm going to come up to Edit and down to Duplicate. And this time I'm going to select that layer. And drag it over. Okay, so here's our first problem. So the two layers don't actually match up. Now a simple fix for this is just to come up to Layer, down to Transform, and then just hit this, flip horizontally. So that's going to make it line up exactly with the edge here. So you're essentially mirroring that layer. Now that's okay, but another option, if I just Control Z that, is I can actually select my layer and simply just move it until it lines up with the edge. Now we've got this bit of a gap down the bottom, but that's okay because we're not going to see that. The foreground is going to cover that layer up. Next, I'm going to grab my midground layer and I'm going to turn that on. And then I'm going to come back up to Edit and I'm going to duplicate that layer. I'm going to hold Shift and move this over. Now this one, I'm just going to come up to Layer, come down to Transform, and then flip. And that's going to line up. Then I'm going to come to my foreground layer. So I'm going to come back up to Edit, down to Duplicate. And then I'm going to move this one across. Then I'm going to come up to Layer again, down to Transform, and then flip horizontally again. And that's going to line up. All right, now if we went back to our camera and we just move this, you can see already we've extended that landscape and it looks pretty good. Now, if you want to continue this on, you simply just keep duplicating those layers and moving them over, and you can keep repositioning them like we've done to keep extending that background. Okay, so at the moment you can see that all the layers are stuck together. Now, if you think about an object that's close to you and an object that's far away from you, and if you start to move side to side, the closest object to you is going to move faster than the distant object. So we have to replicate this inside of After Effects. Now, the way we do this is we actually switch this view here to two views, horizontal. Now, what we're actually seeing here on the left screen are all our layers. So imagine a piece of paper standing upright. Then we have our camera at the front, and that's our angle of view, so what we're actually seeing. And then this is what the camera can actually see, the active view. Now, what we need to do is we need to select our sky layers and move them into the distance. So we do this by selecting both the layers, and I'm going to move them back in Z space. So I need to click this blue arrow here, and I simply just move them back. Now, how far back you move them just depends on how much of effect you want. So the further you move them, the less they'll move. And the further apart the objects, the more of that parallax effect you're going to get. So once you've got them at a reasonable distance, we then hit S on the keyboard, and you can see that they've obviously shrunk because they've moved into the distance, and we need to actually scale these up. So I simply just scale them up until it fills the background again. Now this second layer has shifted around a bit. We can just simply move that one off to the side, and we can reposition that one later. Next, we're going to grab our two background layers and we're going to move them back to about there, and I'm going to scale them up, and I'm using this as a height reference basically, and I'm going to shift this one over. them up. And I'm using this as a height reference basically. And we can reposition that one later. Next, we're going to grab our two background layers and we're going to move them back to about there. And I'm going to scale them up. And I'm using this as a height reference. Basically. And I'm going to shift this one over. So it roughly lines up with the edge again. We can fine tune that later. And then I'm going to grab my midground layer and I'm also going to move that. And then scale this one up as well. All right, so we've got our sky layer, we've got our background layer, and then we've got our midground layer and our foreground layer all evenly spread. Now if I go back to my camera tool and move the camera, you can see straight away we've created that parallax effect. Now when we get to here, we've got a little bit of adjustment to do. Now this one's been squished, so I'm just going to reposition this one and just move it over slightly, just till it lines up nicely. And I'm going to grab this background layer as well, and I'm going to move this one up and then just over as well. All right, so I'm just going to reset my view now. Okay, so I brought my camera back to the far left. Next, I'm just going to navigate down to the transform options for the camera. And I'm going to create a keyframe for the point of interest and the position. I'm going to move along about 6 seconds on the timeline. And I'm just going to move the camera over, holding shift, until we get to the edge of our screen. So if I just play through that, we can see the effect working. Now that's a little bit fast, so I can just move these back to slow it down. Okay, and that looks good there. Okay, so that's the basic parallax effect.